Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. I'm your host, Catherine Tao. Today, we have a great guest. We have Neal Zundell, a Senior Manager of Data Management at Zentalis Pharmaceuticals. And today, we're going to be speaking about data for drug and medical devices. So welcome to the show, Neal. I'm excited to speak with you and learn more about your journey.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Let's just get started. Can you just introduce yourself, tell the audience more about your background?
Sure. I actually started off in the IT spec, and I started off as a computer programmer back in the 80s and landed a job in 1993 at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals in the IT department and became enamored with the way clinical trials were run. And in 1996, I took on a position in Pfizer in the clinical side of the house, which also required being IT savvy. So that was kind of my transition from a IT person to a clinical person. And I've been doing clinical data management for the past 20 years. And I'd say for the past 7 or 8 years have been more heavily involved with the bigger picture, with how we collect the data, how we move the data, the purpose of the data, and the different areas, functional areas of different stakeholders in the data.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great that you had different experiences to kind of shape and send you to the path that you are most interested in. It's important to kind of have that hands-on experience. So that's great. And so the data is very important, especially within just drug and medical fields and healthcare fields. So how important is it for drug and medical devices? How do you really leverage your data within this industry?
Well, the data is critical because the bottom line is we're trying to bring product to market. And to be able to do so, we need to have empirical data that supports our claims, and basically they fall into two categories. The first category, that our product is efficacious or more efficacious than a competitive product. And the second one, which is equally, if not more important, is the safety aspect, that the product is safe to use. And we go through rigorous testing, and the protocols that the subjects have to follow, and these are monitored carefully by medical clinics and hospitals, make sure that they are adhering to the protocol strictly. And for example, taking medications, if it says 30 minutes after a specific time and point with a window of plus or minus 5 minutes, once they're at 36 minutes, that's a protocol deviation, because then the data could be tainted. So we take all of these data points and collect them. And then at the end of the study, the statisticians produce tables and listings and figures supporting our claim, which is sent off in the United States to the FDA or to whatever the governing body is, depending on which country the study's being run. And we go ahead and make a case that this drug or this medical device does what it set out to do, and it's efficacious and safe.
Yeah, great explanation there. And it's also important to note that this medical healthcare drug field is very highly regulated. It's very highly regulated data. We're working with very important data that's, there's a lot of privacy issues. And so how do you and your team kind of handle information like that when it's really private information?
Yeah, the HIPAA laws are very, very important. And obviously, they're not all the same for different countries. So for example, in certain countries, you're not even allowed to collect the subject's date of birth. But yet there are criteria that we need to make sure that a subject is within a certain age range, whether it's adults, whether it's geriatrics, whether it's pediatrics. So in some cases, we just are able to collect, let's say, the year and we then have to go ahead and adjust the programs, that basically compile a person's age. But it is, there are sensitive data, obviously. I mean, all this data is sensitive. When you talk about medical history, you're talking about different medication that the patient's on, and it has to be exceedingly private and protected. And that's why there are all kinds of gateways and protections that hackers cannot get in to our database, but there are certain pieces of information that we're not allowed to legally collect based on the governing bodies of particular countries. So it makes it difficult because we need to have the data. Sometimes we have to think about alternative mechanisms of getting what we need to get without violating the HIPAA laws.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up such a great point about different countries kind of taking care of their data differently. I know that I've spoken to a lot of friends and family members that know people from different countries, and talking about how their countries in the past, they didn't hold their data as well as they didn't have it all kind of written down for their government data for healthcare. And so it's interesting how the healthcare field is kind of handling this amongst different countries. And I'm sure there's a lot of different moving parts to this. So great that you have brought that up. Absolutely. And so overall, how is the data used to grow the overall company? I know you talked about leveraging the data, but is there any specific projects or anything that you can talk about there?
Well, like I said, within every clinical trial, the data really is the absolute supporting documentation of whether or not this trial does what it's supposed to do. There are all kinds of statistical models that are run. So if this product, let's say, is doing as well, but not better than an existing product that's on the market, that might not be, that might not sound like it's doing anything unique. However, if the side effects are a lot fewer and a lot milder, then for safety alone, that might put our product above in the previous ones that are on the market already. So it's really about looking at the data in all different demographies. So we may find that for whatever reason, we're running a clinical trial between ages of 18 to 65, but we may find that it's particularly efficacious in 40 plus, but 18 to 40 less so. So we can stratify the data, and we can go ahead and do data mining to see where the drug or medical device is most effective, and we can pitch to the FDA accordingly.
Yeah, and that's great. And you also brought up kind of measuring the success of a specific drug and knowing how well it will do in the market. So how do you know if a specific drug that you're creating is going to be successful once it's been put out into production? How do you kind of measure that?
Well, we assume that the clinical trials, and that's why the FDA doesn't just say run a clinical trial with 50 patients. We run them in phase 1 through phase 4. And as we go through the phases, we go from more healthy and more generic patients to patients that, let's say, are more immune compromised, that might suffer from the disease. And at any given time, if the clinical trial does not prove what we want to prove, then the whole program will be halted and abolished. Also, we look for toxicity in the body. And that's a key thing. What is the optimal rate, the optimal dosage that you want to give to a subject, to a patient? Whether you want to give them as much drug as will be efficacious without giving them, over drugging them. to the point where they won't be getting anything out of it, and conversely can actually be suffering side effects. So that's, getting that exact dosage involves a lot of different clinical trials, and it involves looking at various different formulations of the compound to see what works best.
Yeah, and it's definitely important to also say that and especially in the healthcare industry, there's a lot of tests that have to be done since it's a healthcare field. Of course, tests have to be done on drug data and everything like that. So great insight that you had just mentioned. And so in terms of kind of the data and the modeling side, what are some of the essential models used within this particular industry? How is AI kind of applied within this?
Well, what we do is we basically extrapolate from what we have to what we would expect to have if you go ahead and you either expand the boundaries, whether it's age related, whether sometimes we find that different cultures respond differently. So a lot of it has to do with getting a really good data sample of subjects. And that's why just running something in the United States is not going to tell you whether or not in Eastern Europe they're going to have the same success. You can have two specific trials that are run in two different countries with very different results. So a lot of it has to do with, we go ahead, we run these trials, and we make assumptions. And these are not just assumptions made, these are statistically based assumptions that allow us to project what would happen in similar situations, because it's impossible to test for every age group and every ethnicity and every country. So a lot of it is based on assumptions, based on the fact that perhaps different cultures tend to respond similarly to the same types of drugs.
Yeah, great. Great that you had brought that up. And I know that you had also mentioned you need to test on different people of different countries as well, just to make sure that the drug is can be used within different countries. And so how do you ensure that this data is quality data when you're kind of collecting this data? I've spoken to a lot of different people on the podcast, and they've spoken about how important it is to really have quality data to work with in order to use that in your AI. So how do you kind of ensure this quality data?
Well, that's really gets down to a lot of what I have direct involvement in. There is a protocol which could be 100 pages long, give or take, which describes exactly what needs to be done in the trial. And there are people such as myself in data management. There are medical monitors. These are doctors who are familiar with the science. So we make sure that the subjects that are involved in the clinical trials are reporting the data exactly according to protocol, because as you mentioned, it's highly regulated. Sometimes, for example, we'll do 3 EKGs and take an average because one could be an aberration. So it has to be the data has to be quality. Sometimes if a subject leaves the trial, we want to know why that subject leaves. Not sometimes, we always need to know why the subject left the trial. Is it because of the drug? If there's an adverse event, something happened, we need to know if it's related, if it's possibly related, if it's totally unrelated. If somebody gets hit by a car, were they hallucinating because of the drug, or are they just careless? And the difference between what you answer to that is going to be a major difference in whether or not this drug has a chance of going to market or not. But what we do, we have people that monitor on site to make sure that the sites are entering the data the way they need to. I can monitor remotely, and if the data looks like it's not being answered appropriately, I can send an electronic message to the person entering the data saying, well, you can't answer question A like this if question B is answered like that. These contradict. Please reconcile, because we need to have the data that matches across the board.
Yeah, great. That you had definitely explained that. That's definitely important to have this quality data, especially in the healthcare field. Um, and so I wanted to kind of transition and talk about the future of drug data in the healthcare industry. How do you think this will be changing throughout the coming years, since technology is constantly changing? So what can we do better to improve this field?
Well, as you mentioned, technology is always changing, and one of the areas that I see uh, as a potential for growth is the way we collect laboratory data that has to be outsourced. There's a lot of third-party vendors. Um, if from the simple chemistry or hematology lab to, if we're doing something specific, we may have RNA sequencing laboratories. We may have laboratories that examine a tumor, that pick it apart. So I think we're getting more specialized in what labs do. It used to just be that you had your labs for your typical blood draws, or your analysis. But now, as we're getting more specialized, particularly in some therapeutic areas like oncology, we're having more specialty vendors, and that's good. But it also means that there has to be a more oversight with them, and it means that there has to be more reconciliation between what is being entered into the electronic database versus what's coming out of these specialty vendors. So I think that's one area where you already see that, especially in certain therapeutic areas where there are a lot more specialty vendors for specific data collection, not the regular vitals, for example, where we take blood pressure. Well, that's easy enough to take and record in the database. But with some of these, when you're looking at analyzing the chemical components of a specific part of the human body, that is not something that's going to be done on site. So there's a lot more corroboration between myself and the clinical folks at Zentellus and the medical folks and these different vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see the future of technology just constantly changing and just improving all fields of the technology industry. So thank you for your insight there. Now I just kind of wanted to transition and talk about things outside of data and technology and just get to know anything that you like to do as hobbies or interests that you have as a pastime. So is there any new hobbies or anything that you've picked up during this time of quarantine, or is there anything that you want to talk about there?
Well, one thing I found out is that, in a certain sense, we've all taken a step back to the way things used to be a couple generations ago, when the family was actually a family. Before COVID, you could have 5 people in a family and they're eating dinner at 5 different times. What COVID has kind of been is kind of an equalizer. If we're all in quarantine, then we're all together. We might as well all get along. I know in my family, we brought back game night, Friday night, where we sit around the table, play a game. And, it's more than just a game. What happens is the kids actually may not realize this. They're actually talking to their parents and having conversations again. One of the rules that when we have game night is all electronic devices go away, because I can't compete with them. But I think people have become more thankful for what they have. On the one hand, we've seen terrible loss of life across the world, and it's just horrifying. On the other hand, I believe the things that we typically take for granted, like waking up in the morning and being able to be relatively healthy, I think more people now realize that that's not an entitlement that we have. And I'm hoping that once we finally are on the other side of COVID, that we will be able to inculcate the lessons that we learned during this period of quarantine and make them an essential, integral part of our lives going forward.
Yeah, I really like that you brought that up, actually. I think it's important to really be grateful for the things that we have because during quarantine, you can't always see um, friends and family as easily just because of travel and everything. So, definitely really important to have that family time and just being able to disconnect from technology for a few minutes or a couple hours just to spend time with your family. Um, very important there, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing this. And we at the
Sure.
Data Standard, we're trying to build a community of data enthusiasts and data thought leaders in order for everyone to collaborate and network with each other. So, what is something the community can do for you?
Well, it's important, as you know, the race. We just saw it with the vaccine. We're not all running that they were running a marathon at a pace of a sprint, but things are happening quicker. You go back to the IT, technological advances. Things are now getting to the FDA, from the FDA, and with more alacrity. And the only way to keep on this upscaled pace is to have data standards, because we don't have the time, nor is it efficient to reinvent the wheel. So there needs to be standards in all parts of data management. How we handle study 102 should be similar to how we handled 101 in the areas that we're doing the same thing. Documents have to be standardized this way, although they're study specific. If you have a standard template and standard data goes into these documents, it makes it easier to finalize, less cycles going around and editing. So we have to work more efficiently, because time is kind of moving faster than it used to, and we have to keep up with that. And the way to keep up with that is to be efficient in the way we implement standards. So to me, this is critical. You can't run clinical trials. You can't be in this industry and not have standards. Now, when I say standards, I'm not looking to take away individuality. I don't, we want people thinking out of the box when we have issues that need solutions, but there are certain basics that need to be standardized. Otherwise, we're just going to be spinning our wheels and wasting time.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing all of this. Definitely important to have this aspect of the data standard, definitely. And where can everyone find you online to connect with you?
I am a huge advocate of LinkedIn. To me, it is the quintessential business networking tool. I have actually found several jobs on LinkedIn, including my current one. I've actually found candidates to hire on LinkedIn. And a lot of times there are very interesting articles, there are interesting perspectives, there are people who share things that fall along this area of data standards, of where the industry is going, some of the new things that are out there. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I think it's a great place for people across industries to be able to interconnect and to be able to take away things that are being done in other industries and then form fit them into what's applicable for your personal job specifications.
Definitely. And it's also important to say that during this time of kind of the remote world, especially in the corporate world, it's so much easier to network with people because you can network with people on LinkedIn now. Like you could always network with people on LinkedIn, but people are more on LinkedIn now, I think, just because things are remote and it's so much easier to reach out to someone online and just be able to have a conversation over a Zoom call. And they could be anywhere in the world, really. And it just seems easier since everyone's kind of working from home now. So, very important. LinkedIn is a great tool to be able to network with everybody and gain insight from others. So, glad that you had also brought that up. And to our
Sure.
audience, yeah, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, as well as our YouTube channel and our LinkedIn. And for our sponsor, we're currently sponsored by Pandio. They're innovating the tech space with their Apache Pulsar messaging system. So learn more about their work at pandio.com. And thank you so much, Neal, for joining us. It was great hearing about your insight about just the field of drug data and the healthcare industry. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
My greatest pleasure. I enjoyed it. And if there are any follow-up questions, anyone wants to reach me, can reach me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Okay. I think the podcast went really well, but did you have any specific questions that you wanted me to re-ask or a specific concept you wanted to address?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that I would have mentioned about the future
Uh-huh.
is that we're going to be more, this year has taught us that we can work remotely, and more companies are going to be having more remote positions.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, I mean, I have a conference call every week where I'm sitting in Chicago. There are people in New York, LA, Australia. So while it's what's today? Monday still? Monday afternoon here. It's Tuesday morning there.
Mm-hmm.
And so there really are no boundaries. I mean, it is one major global society that we live
Yeah.
in.
Definitely. I can ask you the question. Do you want me to queue you up and then you can answer that? And our editors can just cut that into the
Yeah,
podcast.
sure. Why not?
Okay. So just kind of what does the future of the remote world look like? Is that kind of what you're
Yeah.
looking for?
Yeah,
Awesome. Okay.
something like that.
Awesome. Okay. And so, Neal, what does the future of the remote world look like to you? Because everything is kind of remote now. And I've seen a lot of different companies talk about how their recruiting will be different, how anyone can really work at any company anywhere in the world. It's just everything is going to be remote. So, how do you think this is going to change in the future?
I think what COVID has taught the business industry, something that I've been working remotely since 2015, but there are a lot of companies that still feel that brick and mortar, face to face is the best way to operate. And perhaps when you look at that fact in asylum, it is. In a silo, it is. But the truth is, I know for my company, we're looking to recruit the best talent. And after a couple of months of not being able to find somebody, we finally opened it up to remote. And the reason that we did that is because we've all been remote the last year almost. And I think productivity, if it's done correctly, will actually be significantly increased. I'm not suggesting that every 23-year-old who's getting his or her first job is right for remote, because you need to have a certain discipline and you need to have a certain ownership. I think for the more senior positions, we're going to see a lot more remote-based positions. I'm even seeing from recruiters that contact me, there are a significantly larger amount that are remote than on site, and that used to be the exact opposite. So that's another thing. But with that comes more complexities that your team is not necessarily going to consist of people that are local to you. So when I'm sitting in a conference call at 2 o'clock in my time, it could be 11 in the morning or 12 in the morning, actually, in LA, and it could be the next day in Australia. And I have this every week in Australia, New Zealand. So in a certain sense, it allows you to have better talent, but you also have to be more flexible in your scheduling.
Absolutely. And it's great that different companies can recruit anybody in the world now, because people can live wherever they want but still have the job that they want to have at any company living anywhere in the world. So that's awesome that we're able to transition into this. I'm also curious about how competition will be, um, since everything will be remote, everyone's going to be applying everywhere, and so there's going to be, I'm assuming, a lot more applicants, um, with everything kind of transitioning to the remote world. But great insight there, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, perfect.
All right.
Is there anything else that you'd like to speak about, and I can cue you up again?
No, I think we're good. I
Okay,
mean, unless
great.
you have anything else you want clarified or
Um,
added.
no, I don't think so. I think your answers to the questions I gave you were very thorough. So I think that's very detailed, and that's good.